Well, good afternoon and welcome to the seventh episode of what we've been calling COVID Connect. Just as we always start, I want to thank the whole community for making this happen, because this isn't just an into being thing. This is all of the organizations that you see listed in front of you. That one Thursday when we said, let's do this, they all came out of the woodwork. People were emailing me at 10 o'clock at night and sending emails out to a group that has become the group that has now these 7 times gotten together to talk about what we can do to help with the COVID crisis. And we're starting to see some good news out of it, but we're going to talk a lot about that today. Is where are we with this? Some of the things have settled down, but other things are still going. And we want to talk about that today. Now, I want to just make a few ground rules as we always do. The webinar will be available afterwards. No need to ask that. It will be. It gets sent out usually midweek. And you can get to all of the previous webinars at intobeing.com/COVID Connect. And you can see a list of all the prior webinars, as well as the contact lists from those and the chat boxes. So please use those chat boxes, write to all panelists, and you can even share information back and forth live during the webinar. So people have done that on many occasions, made some good connections. Please keep doing that. If I invite you on live, please get off of mute so that we can hear you promptly. And then when we talk, let's keep it brief. Name, company, your needs, your efforts, your ideas. Feel free to share whatever's on your mind, but we'll try to keep it succinct. Just a word about Into Being. We do medical device development, regulatory compliance submissions, design for manufacturing, prototyping. We've been so privileged to be able to work with a number of you on different efforts relating to COVID-19. And just happy to hop on the phone, answer questions. If there's more that needs to be done, we can, but I just want you to know that we're here to answer those questions and to get you moving, get you unstuck. So just let us know. We're going to go through a little bit of latest news. Then we're going to have our special guests on, 3 of them today. Then we're going to talk about some of the statuses of FDA's emergency use authorizations. We'll have time for a question and answer session. And then we'll do our usual community open forum where we want to hear from you. What have you been up to? What are your needs? What are your efforts? And how can we help get you connected? We've been so pleased by the number of people who've gotten connected through this effort. And I just hear every day about another connection that was made. And that's just really encouraging for us here on the team. We do want to hear especially from conveners, folks who are putting other people together, from healthcare professionals. And I'm pleased to have 2 of them as special guests today. We want to hear from test houses, especially. It's interesting how the testing agencies have become a really central part of this quick response role. Material suppliers, manufacturers, folks working on diagnostics. That is where this is going, is to figure out what the diagnostic landscape actually looks like. And folks doing regulatory support as we do. We'd love to hear from other groups as well, hear your experiences with the emergency use authorization process. With that, I want to bring up another thing here, which is that we brought to your attention, I think a couple of weeks ago, the state of Michigan has a statewide available personal protective equipment and bed tracking list. I'm very pleased with the data that the state of Michigan has been putting forward. And I won't belabor this list because we've touched on it previously, but you can see it there in front of you. If you are a supplier of PPE, I think you'll find this chart at the bottom of special interest. We can see what the different healthcare systems have on hand of N95s, surgical masks, surgical gowns, face shields, and gloves. And I'd encourage you to look, and if there's some that's running out, those might be ones you'd want to target to try to get some materials to, even as we speak. Here we have the bed occupancy for those different ones. Our good friend Nikki Kennedy told me, Gene, you got to take those with a little bit of a grain of salt. I think we might hear that a little bit more today in some of our discussions. So, but this resource is there, the raw data is there. You can dig into it and start to learn more about it. Also want to remind you about Pure Michigan Business Connect. They've been doing a great job of aggregating information together, and I understand that they've been doing more vetting work to try to show who's doing what at a deeper level. Also, we came across this recently. The Michigan Chamber of Commerce has a PPE equipment list where they very nicely laid out a number of suppliers, many of whom have been on the webinar here with us in previous weeks. And so although this is not a vetted list, you can go down through it and you can look for leads there as well. Another news item that I just heard about, and I'm going to see if our friend Rachel Rath happens to be on the call. She is. I'm just going to open up her line in case she has anything she wants to add here. But I'm going to show you that Johnson & Johnson Innovations is having a Impacting Public Health, How Can My Idea Be Part of the Solution event this Wednesday, May 6th at 1 to 2 p.m. as a webinar. And so that's by Johnson & Johnson Innovation. Rachel, if you happen to have your mic live, you are live with us. Let's see, maybe I have a technical difficulty there. Rachel, if you can hear me, and you're welcome to say a couple words about this, but otherwise we'll make sure this gets to be part of the package that people see afterwards. Are you there, Rachel?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can just hear you, yep.
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you for flagging it. Johnson & Johnson Innovation, we're JLabs does programs on a very frequent basis, and so this one I thought was timely for this audience. And so we have been here. I'm happy to throw the link for registration into the chat box. And right now, all of our programming has gone virtual and it's free, and the webinars are archived on the website after. So if you miss it and it's a good resource for you, please check it out after.
That's great. We're having a little bit of trouble with your audio there, Rachel, but I think we got most of what you said there, and we'll definitely send people to this. Remember, folks, it is this Wednesday, so that's it's coming right up middle of next week. So we'll look forward to hearing more about that. And Rachel, if there's anything else you want to share with us on another call, we'd welcome you to come back and tell us about what Johnson & Johnson Innovation is doing. So thanks for that. Appreciate you being here. I want to bring up some of these news items that we actually saw a few weeks ago, and some of our team brought forward. We didn't have time to cover them in previous shows, but it's important to note that Attorney General Nessel has been investigating any number of misbranding claims and overpricing claims. So just going to share a few of those. There has been obviously issues with the face masks, misbranded face masks, and sometimes surgical masks being sold as N95s. And of course, if you're a frequent listener here, you know that N95s are about filtration and surgical masks are about liquid prevention and anti-flammability. And so they're completely not the same thing. And you might think, oh, only FDA is going to start looking into this, but no, actually the Attorney General has started doing that. There's a drop shipping company that they've been going after, looking into things like price gouging with regard to face masks. We're also seeing things, and I apologize, these pages weren't loaded ahead of time. This fake coronavirus defender patch that was being sold. Apparently the company involved has agreed to stop selling it, but the Attorney General definitely went after them for this fake coronavirus defender patch that was supposed to help you somehow overcome coronavirus. And then finally, I think we're going to see more of this fake COVID-19 test kits. I mean, what we've heard from our biologist friends on this show has been that this testing is, still under development in many cases, and there's all sorts of issues with false negatives and things like that. And so to see these complete scam test kits out there, it's good to see the Attorney General going after that, and we're thankful for that. So many people have done such great work, and it's always a shame when you see some of these things, but we're thankful that the Attorney General is looking into that, and of course FDA we're sure will be following up on many things that have happened these past months. So with that, we want to go over to our guests. I'm going to unshare this screen, and I'm going to invite our first guest to unmute his mic and unmute his video. He's Dr. Rodney Daniels. He's an assistant professor in both pediatric critical care medicine and biomedical engineering as well as an associate director of MCirc with an interest in translational engineering projects at U of M. And you've had a lot of changes in these last month or two, Rodney. You got pulled into adults ICU COVID plus or COVID critical care. So we would just love to thank you for coming on. We'd love to hear a little bit more from you about what your experience has been getting pulled from pediatric stuff into adult COVID care, and give us how did this story work out?
Yeah, so it's an interesting story. Hope y'all can hear me well, and there's no problems with audio. As you can see, I have my pediatrics top on. This is what I wear in the hospital too, a lot of times. But I have a background in internal medicine and pediatrics, so I was a med ped, as we were called in residency. I went in and focused on pediatric critical care. But me and a couple of my colleagues were pulled over into an expanded COVID unit to help deal with the pressing needs of the adult COVID patients who are needing critical care support. We don't primarily do, obviously, adult care. I will say in the ICU and the PICU at Michigan, we take up to officially 22 years old. And if they have congenital problems, those kind of things, we'll take it sometimes up to 25 years old. So it's not that we don't deal with adult-sized patients, but we're not the primary adult caregivers. So as we needed to help out Michigan with more support in the adult units, some of us were pulled over to man and to direct and be the attendings in a completely adult COVID ICU. And we did that for the past 4+ weeks, past month or a little bit more. We just got scaled back down. I actually just came back home. I did stay away during the time that I was serving there. And it was an interesting time to be pulled over, but we were glad to help.
So what are the main observations that you've seen as a clinician dealing with this? I remember we originally heard, oh, it's a respiratory disease, and then I remember our friend Nikki Kennedy was saying there's some indications that this has largely to do with inflammation, and we started seeing that in the news. What's your, as a clinician, how do you get your mind around this and characterize what it is?
I think in the end, it's going to be hard to characterize it as a single entity with any given patient. It's very much like sepsis in that regard. And what I mean is that it attacks people. It has effects on people in different ways. One person may have primarily really bad respiratory failure. Another person may have respiratory failure, but also then they have cardiovascular collapse. They have cardiovascular failure, even if they don't have an extensive cardiovascular history before. And they get what it seems like a myocarditis type picture with this. If you don't need the ICU, there are even some patients that have GI symptoms. So I think it's really hard to say there's just one type of patient that you see in the ICU. But I will say, obviously, it is primarily a respiratory, really oxygenation problem. So I saw a report that described it as if we were seeing people on the top of Mount Everest. And there's a lot of truth to that, meaning that they could get air in and out. It wasn't that they didn't have what we call compliance in their lungs, or their lungs couldn't open and close, but because of the damage and the inflammation that was going on down in the air sacs, the alveoli, they just couldn't get oxygen really into their bloodstream, and they were having problems just oxygenating themselves. And it was very much like someone who is at the top of Mount Everest. There's not enough oxygen to really get into their system. Now, that's a simplified version of it because it also has a lot of inflammation. And we did see lots of patients with inflammation as a major problem going on with this. And again, you could say, well, if there's myocarditis and everything, it all plays together, and that's true. But we did see some patients who, cardiovascularly, they were fine, but had a lot of inflammation, and we even used some drugs for that. So we would use an IL-6 blocker. An IL-6 is just a cytokine and inflammatory substrate that can cause more inflammation in the body. And sometimes we would use a drug to block the IL-6 that's circulating. And then we also did use remdesivir. You've heard about that drug as well. I can't really say, it looks like there's some positive things coming out from the studies. I'll let those completely finish and then be reported before I'll make any assumptions on that. But we did use remdesivir as well. I will say the one thing we did not use in our unit was any of the anti-malarial type drugs. We did not use any of those, chloroquinolone, those kind of things. We did not use those in our unit and for patients coming in because of the questionable benefit.
That's fascinating. Now I've got to emphasize, you're not here in your U of M capacity or anything like that. This is just Rodney's impressions of having been with COVID patients.
That's
But I
true.
think there's a lot of questions, and we're starting to see all the second guessing, and everyone's going around. Oh, I should have done this, or should have done that, or it wasn't as big, or it was too big, or there's all this information and misinformation floating around. I know my own personal perception has been, you make a decision at a point in time, and you make the best decision you can, and y'all stick together based on the decision you made at a point in time. And you may learn things over time, and that's just the way it is. But what's your, insofar as you're comfortable sharing, what's your personal perception of kind of where we thought we were, how we responded, where we are now, what's appropriate next? Understanding that this could all change. I mean, this is we're throwing opinions around here, but you're a little closer to it than most of us are.
I think it really depends on the region that you're in to some degree, how well you may have even appeared to be ready for it. There are some regions that in rural areas that may not have a meat packing plant, so to speak, but there may be some areas that really didn't have large numbers and made it through, seemed like maybe they were okay, but maybe in the end, if they had more numbers, they weren't. Other places like Detroit, obviously New York, where it was just overwhelming. And even if they felt like they were getting as much of the PPE and other things prepared for these patients as they could, there was just no way to really prepare fully. I think at Michigan, we were somewhere in the middle, and I certainly have nothing negative to really say about Michigan's response. They really did hit it early, and I'm not saying that just because I work at Michigan. They really did think about how to phase this in. They were ready with the field hospital really before we even needed it. They ended up backing down on that because we didn't need it. And it's really been a pretty good phase up and phase down. Now, that's not the case everywhere. The VA system's very strapped. And again, I think it gets to, funny enough, the supplies, the preparedness of any given hospital is very heterogeneous, just like sepsis in the patient is. It really is about how the area is affected, how much they had when it started, and where they went from there. I will say that I think as a nation and just as a national response, we weren't ready really for what hit, especially if you look at New York and a lot of the areas, even Detroit, that was hit very, very in a bad way. So I think that our response, we could have learned some lessons maybe from some epidemics, not pandemics, but epidemics that started making their way around the world. I think we just got lucky that they didn't really hit us hard. And we could have learned some lessons then. So I feel like we could have been better prepared as a nation, certainly. And as you're seeing in the news, there's lots of hospitals that could have probably been better prepared. But in a way, it was kind of like a tsunami wave. It's hard to prepare for a tsunami until it hits, and then you're like, oh my gosh, now the tsunami's here. And that's how it happened in a lot of ways. I hope that answers your question to some
Yeah,
degree.
no, that's good. And I think one of the things that we've talked a lot about, on this webinar and other conversations, since we're very device focused, is there were efforts around the time of the H1N1, 2009, where low-cost ventilators were being developed. There's been a lot of research into decontamination of masks that dates back 5 or 10 years, and largely it was sort of ignored up until the point where oh, now people are pulling it out of the woodwork. And I hope that this will be enough of a public-facing thing that there'll be a little bit of a wake-up call, and people say, yeah, we could do a little more to prepare for this. So, just a little bit, and we'd be much more ready the next time something comes. There's not as much scrambling.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. I definitely don't want to underscore the overwhelming nature in a lot of hospital systems, especially in Detroit. The Sinai
yes,
system and others have really been overwhelmed. Even us, and I think that you were going to mention this or ask me about this a little bit later, but like myself, I've been pulled into a unit that normally we don't cover. So even when I feel like we've been relatively prepared at Michigan overall, it still hit us to the point that there were surgeons that stopped doing surgeries to take care of people in the COVID units, and just did medicine instead of surgery for that period of time. Subspecialists who've been pulled to do critical care, hospitalists who don't generally do critical care but are pulled to help cover those patients. So, in every system that has seen significant numbers, it's been, a real strain on the system,
yeah.
which
What
affects other things down the line.
what do you make of that, Rodney? Because I mean, we keep hearing these stories of, and I hope I'm not misnaming, but I think it was like Beaumont and Henry Ford had to lay off a combined total of maybe 5,000 people. But we're hearing they're not mostly clinical staff. And so I think from the outside, people have a really hard time of getting a picture of what's happening in terms of workload. I think some of us have this picture of like, either everybody's bored or everybody's, completely overworked, and we just can't quite tell what that looks like. So what, if you had to sort of map it, what has happened with resources inside of hospitals as far as you're aware?
Yeah, the best way to describe it, I think, as far as those who've had to be furloughed, hopefully they can come back to their jobs sometime down the road in the future, is collateral damage. It's just really been bad from that respect. That's the best, kind of similarity that I can draw. Um, at one point, we had over 200 plus COVID positive patients in the hospital. Many of them in the ICUs. Opened multiple different areas that effectively were ICUs that weren't really ICU areas before. And the reason that put such a strain is then you have to pull, like I said, others from other areas to go cover these areas. Well, that may leave some areas like surgeries, outpatient surgeries, which is a large proportion of patients that come in and get treated at the hospital and then go home. That not only speaks to the financial side of it, but also all those other extra employees that you're talking about, other support employees that are helping a lot of these areas where these things happen. And so there's areas you go, and wow, there's really not much happening here. But the background of the staff, like surgeons and others, are being pulled to other areas. So there's the draw on resources in one end and then kind of a vacuum on the other side in some areas. So that is very true. But until we can move back more to a somewhat more normal, landscape, it's really been a financial shock to the system on the medical side, and it's caused a lot of these furloughs and so forth. So they're starting to phase in some more urgent surgeries, not necessarily just emergent surgeries is what it was before. They're starting to phase in some other areas of care that we can start pulling things back a little more normal, but they're doing it in a phased way, not only because of protecting the patients from the COVID pandemic that still we have lots of patients in the hospital, obviously, and lots of caregivers still doing that, but also just to try to pull it back in and make sure that everyone's safe and that we're doing this in a way that we don't just then flood everyone back to the hospital and cause other problems. So again, collateral damage is the best way I can describe it. And I feel really, really bad for those who've had to be furloughed. It's just been really a pull from a lot of these areas that don't generally have to pull to do the things they've done.
Everyone's getting sort of pulled around in places that they've never been before. Yeah, that's
Right.
that's great.
And
We
when you
could,
pull the surgeons over, they can't do their operations. And then those people that are in the OR staff, if they're not being pulled over to the ICUs, which some of those were too, then they, scrub nurses and others, they may not have anything to do there because there's not a lot other than emergency surgeries. And, then it goes down the line too, outpatient areas that are doing a lot more video calls now, but less in-person calls. And there's a lot of video stuff going on. But again, some of those personnel that work in those offices, maybe they have to be off for a little while until they start getting more inpatient visits and those kind of things. So that's the strain that's put on the system.
That's great. I think our audience would be fascinated to hear about this all day. It's really interesting what you've been seeing and the insight into that, because from the outside, it often just looks like this monolithic thing that must have a binary answer. And in fact, there's a lot of things going on. Let me ask our audience really quick. If you have any questions for Dr. Rodney Daniels, you can feel free to raise your hand in the Zoom box there, and we'll look forward to answering your question. Our friend Ken Spencer.
Hi, Ken. I saw your name. I wondered if you'd say hello.
Yeah, right. Good to see you're alive and well there.
Yep, made it through.
Good. Hey, question, is the School of Public Health interfacing with you at all to collect data on the patients and things? So we understanding of who, what, when, and where?
I know that there's a lot of data being taken in the background. I work with MCIRC, as was mentioned before, which is a group that does critical care research from adults and peds, and we're pulling a lot of data from these patients. So there is a lot of data being mined and looked at, even from the pediatric side, for what pediatric patients we saw or even young adults that we've seen. So that is being done. I can't tell you specifically who and what has been set up to do that, but I do know that that is being done in the background fairly extensively, depending on what data you're looking at.
Great. Thanks for that, Ken. Any other questions for Dr. Rodney Daniels? Hey, it's our friend Rachel Kunch from Public Sector Consultants. You're live.
Good afternoon, Dr. Daniels. Thanks for being a part of this.
My pleasure.
As a former ECMO patient, I'm curiously watching how ECMO is being used to help COVID patients, and I'm wondering what other kind of innovations may be spurred or could be spurred as a result of this crisis.
Well, that's great that you made it through your ECMO ordeal. I can only imagine what you had to go through because I do treat patients with ECMO, even kids with ECMO. So, you know, it's glad to hear that you're doing well after all of that. There's actually been a lot of patients, a good number of patients that have been put on ECMO that were COVID positive for different reasons. Mainly adults, because we really haven't seen, interestingly enough, hardly any children with critical illness from COVID. And that is very curious to me. That is definitely an area of research moving forward. We need to figure out why are kids relatively protected against severe disease and critical illness, because that's fascinating to me. All of us in the pediatric ICU felt like we'd probably see 6, 7 patients any given day in the pediatric ICU we were taking care of. We knew it wasn't going to be the adult level, but we did not expect to see the 1 or 2 that we've seen occasionally every other week in the ICU. So it's much, much less. As far as innovation, to your question, so back to ECMO really quickly. On the adult side, I know there's been as many as 9 or more, I think, that have been on ECMO. I haven't had ECMO any in the unit that I was working at. They were primarily more in the surgical ICU, where they were dealing with those patients, and in some of the ICUs at UH. The ICU that we put up was actually over in Mott, near the RICU, which is the major COVID ICU that's over there. But other innovations, interestingly enough, I've been working with, there's a group in the ED that actually is putting up a way to do a portable kind of tent protector with some negative flow as well to help patients that are in these settings. There's some other innovations that are continuing to move forward to really help protect individuals and protect patients as well. I can say this also because it was put out there from IMCIRC, but there was a industrial hood that's being used as it's a large amount of negative flow in the hood, so that you can do things like high flow. You can even do maybe some CPAP or BiPAP, and you can protect against those aerosolized virus particles that get out there and they get sucked back in, so that's an extra layer of protection, so we can do more non-invasive ventilation, because I really think a lot of these patients could have saved intubation if we could done a little bit more of true non-invasive ventilation, BiPAP, CPAP, in some of them without having to go straight to intubation. But they went straight to intubation because of the risk of aerosolized particle, which was a much, much higher risk to caregivers with aerosolized particles being out and about while you're trying to care for them. So there's been a lot of innovation out there, but we keep working on it.
That's great, Rachel. Thank you for that question. I want to try to get in one more here. We have 2. We're gonna take just a couple minutes. We'll try to keep them short here. But Divya Patil, you're live.
Good afternoon, Dr. Daniels. Could you talk about the protocols or how things will change in the OR with phased returns of these surgeries? Like, for example, even regular surgery and intubating a patient, I'm sure those things will change in the light of COVID-19 until we find a vaccine. So just curious about those aspects. Thank you.
Sure. No, thank you for your question. I appreciate that. I don't know all the surgical plans now, but I can tell you it appears as though, as we've been talking about in the media, testing is going to be a key. So if you're coming in, I foresee that you will be tested, especially if it's an elective procedure or anything that is not urgent or emergent. You will be tested for COVID. If you are negative, then you will have a regular OR course for the most part. If you are positive, then that may have another pathway of protocols that they have to look into. Certainly, they would intubate any COVID positive patient the same way they have been, very much protective measures, maybe even a tinner screen over them, lots of PPE for the providers, and a limited number of people there doing the intubation. We actually tried to limit the number in the rooms to only a couple of people, just the basic people that needed to be there for that procedure because of the aerosolized nature of it. So to answer your question, I think there's going to be a lot of screening before you get any type of elective surgery. Just like you would get, pre-op labs, they'll do a COVID test. But if you're positive, that may be the tricky part. And I can't answer that right now because that's still a bit uncharted, and we'll see where we go from there.
That's great. We've got Cindy Wadnicki. You're live.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
It seems like we're not hearing much about essential workers being affected. Is this your experience, that not a lot of the doctors and nurses are being affected?
Thanks, Cindy, for your question. I think that honestly, this has a lot to do with the resources available to you. So especially early on when we were getting patients, or areas were getting patients in, like Detroit, and it wasn't clear how big the problem was, how much PPE was really available, there was more exposure. I think as we've gotten better at what we're doing, even with recleaning of N95s at Michigan, I've had to reclean my N95, but it goes to a really vetted process that we've done with it, which is a combination of UV and heat, so that we don't decrease the integrity of the N95 mask, and it comes back to us. But we've been very careful with our procedures, and if you're very careful with those, we found that you can be relatively protected and, you know, somewhat safe. It's always going to be a risk there, and especially during those aerosolized procedures, which are the higher risk. So yes, it's been better as time's gone on. I believe a lot of the essential workers and frontline workers, we've kind of figured out how best to protect ourselves. There are still exposures, but it is less than it was initially. The caveat to that, though, is any place that has strained resources and is giving somebody an N95 mask to use for a week, and they have to keep using it back and forth and on and off, it's a bit like roulette there. It's a matter of time where you might get exposed, even if you're trying to be very careful. So again, it goes back to, are the resources available? Is there good PPE available? Even if you have to reuse something, is it frequent enough cleaned so you're not having a major exposure and it's not having to go multiple days a week, 2 weeks? The VA system, even there's some places that it sounds like people are having a mask. If you're in a non-essential area, but you could have big exposure, you might have to have your mask for a couple of weeks before you can change it or change it out. So those, I think, are the key things for the frontline workers and exposure.
That's great. Dr. Rodney Daniels, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate you being here, Rodney.
No problem. It was a pleasure to be here, and I will join in on other seminars in the future too with you.
We really appreciate your perspective. Thanks so much again.
No problem.
That's great. I want to introduce our next guest, and actually, I'm not quite sure if it's both Tony and Rosie or just Tony, but Dr. Anthony Olivero and Dr. Rosemary Olivero, husband-wife team, pediatric critical care physician and a pediatric infectious disease physician. And together they founded Inspired Biometrics. They're developing a wearable health device to enable remote health monitoring. And I've got them both there. We've got Tony and Rosemary.
Both made it. Hi.
Full disclosure, Intubing's been working with Inspired. What actually prompted this bringing you guys on was I noticed on LinkedIn, you guys had posted a whole bunch of data. You guys are data fiends in your work life and in everything else. And I saw all these graphs and charts, and I love charts and graphs. And so I went, you know what, come on and talk to us, because your product is about data, but you've been crunching numbers with respect to COVID. And I thought it'd be fun to have you talk to us for a few minutes about what you're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Gene, for organizing this and the introduction as well. And as you mentioned, Rosie's pediatric infectious diseases, I'm peds critical care. And then we have that third interest in COVID being the startup that you guys have helped us along the way, being Inspired Biometrics, and developing a wearable health device to enable remote monitoring. And so the population that we've always been most interested to serve are the vulnerable populations to severe outcomes from infections. And those are people with underlying health conditions and chronic illnesses. So yes, you're absolutely right. We love data. Our company loves data. And what I'd like to do, instead of having everybody stare at my ugly mug, is be able to share some of those data and findings with the crew. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me see if is that coming through?
Let's see, we're waiting to see. I'm not seeing your screen share just yet. Go ahead and try it once more.
Okay.
Green button at the bottom, screen share.
Yep.
And then select which.
Should be that.
There we go. Now we're starting to see it. Here it comes.
So, thank you. So all of the data that we have come up with, the vast majority is gathered from just public-facing websites.
Sorry, Tim, let me pause you. We're not quite seeing it yet, I don't think, on our end. It says it started screen sharing, but we don't quite have the app being shared yet.
me see if. Unfortunately. Yeah, it says it's paused. I'm looking for a quick solution.
It wouldn't be a Zoom meeting if there wasn't a technical difficulty. That's obviously the way it is.
Do you see any?
Maybe do stop share and then reshare.
All right, let me try this.
Also, if you have a website or something you want me to bring up, I can at least,
Yeah,
I can at least bring
actually,
it up.
if you don't mind, Gene, just inspiredbiometrics.com. Sorry about that.
No worries. We are going to share that starting. Oops, let's see. I think you just did a share again.
Is that
Cancel that share that time.
okay?
Okay, there you go. We've got that. You want the COVID-19 link
Yes,
there?
please. So yes, you can just click through to COVID-19 and that will get you to that first coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 tracking.
Okay.
And what I think is probably helpful is I'll just go through a few bullet points of things that we've noticed. So it's not the first row of slides, but the second. And the first thing is, and this echoes what I think Rodney was saying just previously, is we need more testing. So right now in Michigan, there's just under 2% of the population that's tested. And with that, you can, the big red circle is the people not tested in Michigan as of 4/26. And the chart on the right of that is you see the blue line rising, and that's the absolute number of tests performed. And then the red line, which is on the right y-axis, is downtrending. As we're testing more people, we're having less and less positive. So at our peak, we were right around 25, 28% positive tests, and now we're down to about 22%. So I think the biggest part of these types of charts is to recognize that we're too early to make any big predictions about where this is headed in terms of what's the true prevalence and the impact of what COVID's going to be like here in Michigan for sure.
That's interesting. I think I might have sent you and some of us were discussing an article that the Associated Press put out, and they weren't drawing any conclusions from it. They were just putting numbers out. But in the federal prison system, which has approximately 150,000 inmates, they issued like 2,700 tests, I think, and 2,000 of them came back positive. And I guess it's maybe not too surprising given the close quarters. But it sounded from the article like over the entire prison system of 150,000 inmates, there were only 30 deaths. Does that ring true? Does that ring false? Do you have any thoughts on that, or where this goes? Because it seems like that might be sort of we're looking at an isolated population that may or may not be representative of where we're going.
So I think there's going to be a lot of variability based on local practices. So federal prisons probably have very similar management strategies, whereas state prisons and local prisons may have different strategies. So when they acted, we've seen timing of action. When you compare places like San Francisco to New York, there may have been impact of how early organizations were to react to the COVID pandemic. And we've seen that in Michigan, that MDOC, the Michigan Department of Corrections, has the highest rate of rise out of any county in Michigan, including Detroit, Wayne, Oakland, and beyond. And their death rate is pretty impressive as well, unfortunately. That probably reflects some degree of underlying health conditions in that population as well as obesity, which we know is a risk factor for death with COVID.
Comment on one other thing. I think there's some really interesting literature about people who are pre-symptomatic and the amount of virus that you're exposed to. And if you're living in very close proximity type conditions and you're exposed to a high amount of virus, that actually does seem to correlate some degree, depending on the population you're looking at, but it does look like it does have an impact on how ill and what your mortality risk is going to be. So there's so many variables that are playing into that risk for severe disease and death.
That's a really interesting point, Rosemary, because we just to put another data point into that in the interactions with FDA, and I'm hoping to get to share more of these in the coming weeks in more explicit detail. But what we've been finding is one of the questions that FDA has, and basically says we don't know what the infection threshold is. So when we start to talk about things like how much do we have to prevent getting to a person, how much do we have to kill before a mask goes back on a person, they're basically going, yeah, we don't actually know what that number is. So we need guarantees that you're pretty much, for example, killing everything there. So I think it's really interesting you bring that up too, which is it could be something that the more you are exposed to, the more you are susceptible to. That's a fascinating point. Great. Well, these are really fun observations. I'm going to open it up and see if any of our group here, let's see, I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to see if any of our group here have any questions. We would love to hear any questions from Doctors Anthony and Rosemary Olivero, who have been looking at this data quite a bit and certainly have many different perspectives on this. Let's see if we got anybody online with a question for you guys. Not seeing any yet, but I'll give people just another about 30 seconds. Let me ask you this question too. Have you seen anything, do you have any trends across the state? Because obviously I remember when I would follow MLive every day, and I still check it frequently, and I'd see the state chart there, and Detroit was just lighting up like it was just going. And it might have been Steve from our team sent me a note the other day and went, have you seen the latest rates in Grand Rapids? And they had spiked. Do you have any overall statewide trends that you can just fill us in on really quick?
Also linked in on those websites are those. So there's a COVID-19 prevalence in Michigan where we compared a variety of counties, and then the Michigan Department of Corrections as well. And just like you mentioned, Detroit and the Metro Detroit area really seemed to peak early. And I think there's a variety of factors, none that we can certainly directly point to, but the cases in Detroit have certainly declined, the new cases, where on the west side of the state in Grand Rapids, they are rising. So this speaks to the regionality of how COVID is impacting communities and healthcare systems. So I think the likely thing is that we're going to have to roll out different social distancing measures, different strategies for control of the spread of COVID. So Detroit may be able to open up or decrease its restrictions, whereas Grand Rapids and Kent County may need to increase restrictions.
On a local basis, based on what they're seeing. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, great. Well, not seeing any questions from the online group right now, but really appreciate you guys coming on and sharing this with us. And I think it's really great that you guys are crunching the numbers and painting the pictures, because it's so helpful to see those things graphically displayed. And you can go to inspiredbiometrics.com and click on their COVID-19 link to look at their data that they're putting together.
Hey, Jane.
Thanks for having us.
Question.
Ian, sorry, this is Rodney. I didn't see a hand raise on my screen. I apologize.
Oh, no, Rodney, welcome back.
I was just going to ask, it really seemed like one of the biggest risk factors is obesity. We saw that as a major problem, regardless of age. If you were obese, especially morbidly obese, that risk factor really went up, regardless of what your age was. Are you finding that being as a primary, or maybe one of the primary risk factors, even regardless of age, or do you feel like it's age versus obesity and a combination? I'm just curious to see what your thoughts are, because you're looking at the data.
Yeah, so the publication, I think it was from last week, where they, forget if it was New England Journal, but they listed out these chronic health conditions that are the highest risk, and hypertension being one of them. It's interesting because in those data sets, they did not include obesity, whereas some of the other reports are specifically reporting obesity as a chronic health condition. So absolutely, from those big data sets that were published, I think from last month, they show that 90% of all the deaths, the patients had at least one underlying health condition. And it's, as you know, likely the more risk factors you have, there's probably some interplay and increase risk for mortality. But I don't know that we can unfortunately characterize which of those between obesity and hypertension, which both seem to be pretty impactful to outcomes, which is worse.
Yeah, and I think the early, it's actually pre-peer-reviewed data that came out of China. They really tried to control for obesity as an independent risk factor to see if that increased your risk for severe pneumonia or mortality. And that early data, again, it's not peer-reviewed yet, but it did support the notion that obesity as an independent risk factor is associated with more severe presentations. And then if we could just zoom into the pediatric experience, not that we've had in Grand Rapids, because we just have not had very many hospitalized children, thankfully, but from the New York experience, they, with the children who were hospitalized and had severe cases with ICU level care, almost every one of those children were obese. And so, in the pediatric population, we can have very obese children, but don't often have the other metabolic syndrome complications. But I think it's really telling that of the pediatric patients in New York, that the vast majority had the complication of obesity or severe obesity. So I think it is real.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well. I just think it's very curious. Obesity probably comes with a level of underlying kind of baseline inflammation, inflammatory state. And, like I said, I was very disappointed to see that it's not been one of the factors to try to really pull out in some of the reports. I think that that's going to be interesting to look at. So sorry, I digress.
No, that's great, Rodney. Appreciate that. Yeah, and any of our folks who are on as sort of panelists today, you're welcome to pop back in. And as we go through the conversation and ask, so I appreciate you doing that, Rodney. We have one question online here. Olaf Ile says to Doctors Olivero, how do the Michigan data on testing and positive tests and other data compare to U.S. nationwide data? Any perspective you have? No need to show detailed data.
We are not testing a lot of people, and we have not tested a lot of
I
people.
think we're now about 1,000 per day in Kent County. So that's a big improvement as of the past week.
Just compared to,
Yeah.
So in always trying to normalize it to populations and population density. I think the testing has been more urgently needed. So you see these big spikes in like New York, where King County obviously did a lot of testing because they were an early center. So we are ramping up. I think we're on average somewhere 8,000, 8,000 per day in Michigan, and that has steadily increased. And now, as we start to do, right, we're doing both the nasal swabs, the PCR, and then as well we'll be able to do antibody testing. I think, and I think as Rodney pointed out, there will be pre-operative and pre-procedural testing that is we haven't solidified a plan yet, but it's very likely going to happen in hospitals that we're going to have some sort of screening protocol before patients come in for what would be considered higher risk procedures where they may aerosolize COVID, where they're intubated or have an endoscopy.
Great.
So the testing is going to go up for sure, but it's a matter of time.
Are you saying in all that, Tony, that that we uniquely in Michigan have tested less than the rest of the country? I don't want to read that in, but do you feel, or just nationwide, do you feel like that's?
I think nationwide there's been a lag in testing and its availability of tests more than the desire. So I think as we've gotten more kits, in West Michigan, I think in the beginning it was like 40 per day that we had a max in Kent County. And now it's up in the thousands.
We're up to, we can do 1,500 a day, and we're doing about 1,000 per day.
So yeah, it's ramped up pretty significantly.
That's good. That's a great perspective. Great. Well, barring any other questions, and if you guys hang around for a bit and any others come up, we'll certainly pass them on.
I have a question.
Oh, you have a question, Aaron. Sorry.
Can you guys comment on any differences you might be seeing or might exist between the different testing types, like the DNAs versus serologicals?
Yeah, I can comment on that a bit. So the test that we're doing in West Michigan is an RNA PCR. And interestingly, so that's both the more traditional RNA PCR that's set up and gets you a result in 4 to 6 hours. And then we also are using a rapid PCR test, which is actually quite novel, because when we hear the word rapid test, everybody thinks of the abysmal rapid flu test that has about a 50% sensitivity, and that's a antigen detection based test. So the rapid test that we're using here, that is being rolled out in many different places for rapid use, is actually a PCR based test. So it's really pretty awesome to see that molecular diagnostic being rolled into a point of care setting. That's been really important for your ER patient who could potentially get admitted to a very susceptible type of unit, like a hem-onc unit or a bone marrow transplant ward, somebody who's going in for surgery, either electively or emergently. So it's really important to have that rapid test. So we're using those two. So you have the standard PCR 4 to 6 hour turnaround, then your rapid, which is about 30-minute turnaround. Just depends on how quickly you can get the test to the machine. And then a very hot topic has been the use of serology to detect different antibodies to SARS-CoV-2. And it's a hotly debated topic. And Jean, you mentioned earlier about some of the almost fraudulent type nature that some of these companies will put out. And so actually getting through all of these types of serologies and making sure they're legitimate has been a full-time job for our lab personnel. So at Spectrum, we're looking at, I think, 4 different platforms that either our FDA has gotten some early kind of approval to move forward, or that Mayo Clinic has validated. And we're hoping we'll be able to have that within a week or 2. But we have to do some internal validation because they're not FDA approved as we would like them to be. I hope that answered your question.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, great question, Aaron. That's one of the things that I think is going to become more and more of a topic as a part of this. And I think Brandon McNaughton from Acadia might be coming on to talk about the biology of some of this stuff next week too. But everyone goes, oh, it's a COVID test, but
Yeah.
it's not just a COVID test. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes there.
And I think the one thing that, if I could just interject one more.
Please, yeah.
I think as a diagnostic, just for consumer use, I think that obviously having antibody tests is really important. But I think one of the big things that we're lacking right now is knowing the relevance of the antibody test. So everybody would like to know, hey, you've had COVID, now you're immune, you're good for 2 months, 3 months, 2 years, but we actually have no data to say that is true or not. So we really need some longer term data that comes out of probably the first countries that were impacted to be able to say that. So even though we have a test, I do have to still say in my mind, we still don't know what a positive test actually means, which sounds really sad. You would think that you're positive, you're good, but we actually don't know that. Yeah, from an antibody standpoint.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that up, because it's one thing to have numbers, but it's another thing to know what those numbers mean.
Right.
Yep. That's great. Let me ask this one last question that we did get from Robert Reisner, and Rodney, if you're still on the line, you can weigh in on this too. This is a hot button question. We'll see if anyone wants to touch this with the 10-foot pole. Is shelter in place strategy compared to the Sweden approach, which has been the more supportable approach? Does anyone want to touch that one with a 10-foot pole?
I love this conversation. So I'll jump in. I'll try and keep it brief. I know we're getting short on time. I think it is incredibly difficult to compare countries to countries. And for the reason that we talked about early in our discussion about how regional this effect is. Now they're comparing Nordic countries to Nordic countries. How do we compare them, their population density, their movement, their societal practices, their interactions, the amount they touch each other? There's so many risk factors that go into that epidemiologic model. When you look, Sweden to Norway, it's interesting. Sweden has had, I hope I'm not, one of them is the mortality is 3 times higher than the other, but the more restrictive, or the one that has more of a shelter in place, has lower mortality. So it would support that shelter in place, but there's so many other psychosocial factors that go into human behavior, human happiness. How does happiness impact your immune system and your ability to fight infections? So we're not made to be socially distant creatures. I'll stop it at that.
That's a great answer. It goes back to what you were saying earlier, which is that we're seeing different things in different parts of a state, in different parts of a country, in different countries, and at some level, you just got to know how your local ecosystem is responding to it, and that's going to have a lot to do with it. In addition to what do the numbers even mean? Well, this is great. Unfortunately, we have to cut it short.
Real quick too, if you want.
Oh yeah, Rodney, please give us about a 1 minute. I've got to get over. We've got to go over to our next guest pretty quickly.
The only thing I will say is no models are good. Some are informative. we'll put it that way. But I will say that I really think the numbers would have been much higher. We wouldn't be talking about being able to take a breath now if we would have just let things go as they were going. So it's hard for me to not say shelter in place didn't help. And hopefully we don't see a second, we'll see probably a second uptick, but hopefully it won't be very big. So I think there's a balance, and as we move forward, there's a balance in staying home versus trying to get some things going in a responsible way. But, for the US at least, taking the Sweden approach, I think would have been potentially catastrophic or really not a good idea when this was the tsunami was coming, as I had said before. So
Yeah,
that's just
great
my
perspective. Yeah. Well, the reality is society did massively get up and do something. So we still haven't evaluated that effect, but it was a major response and a major distancing. So you can't ignore the effect of that. That's great. Appreciate it. Well, all of you, thank you so much for offering us these clinical perspectives and looking at the data, because I think this is where we are as a community right now, is needing to look at these things, and that's just been absolutely phenomenal. So I really appreciate Anthony, Rosemary, Rodney, thank you for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for organizing.
I want to bring on our very patient and so well-connected friend, Paul Reiser from TechTown, Detroit. He's the managing director of Tech-Based Entrepreneurship. Paul, I feel like we've been drinking from a fire hose today.
You say that again.
I love it. Let's see. Can we bring your video up there?
The host has stopped it.
Oh, there we go. Try that.
All right. There we go.
Hey, there's Paul.
Hey, everybody.
Wow. So I trust you and yours are all well?
Yeah, all well. And I'm going to try to do this for the sake of the webinar and your commitment to time in about 90 seconds.
Oh my goodness. No, we want to hear from you. We want to hear what you've been seeing from your vantage point over at TechTown. And also, I know you've been keeping track of a lot of programs and things like that. They're going to be of interest to businesses. And so we'd like you to take a minute and tell us about those.
Yeah, I've been at TechTown for about 6 years now. And for those who might not know, TechTown services about 500 businesses. It's an incubator and accelerator in the city of Detroit. Been around for over 15 years, delivering services. And businesses of all sizes are highly impacted relative to COVID-19. And TechTown, about maybe 3 weeks ago, stepped up initially with a neighborhood stabilization fund to really help the Main Street lifestyle businesses, mom and pop shops, coffee shops, restaurants, small manufacturers, et cetera, with the goal of raising $250,000. And we hit a goal, we exceeded the goal and reached about 650. And this is from philanthropy, from individuals, from corporations, just trying to lean in and help these small businesses until the cavalry comes in, so to say. But what we realized even in that, which was great to raise that amount of capital, but the demand for those applications, which were intended to be in increments or sizes of about $5,000, was the demand was $1.2 million in those applications. So we turned around and created another fund, and that was $500,000. It just closed, and notices should be going out to small businesses and Main Street folks pretty soon. What I noticed also in the midst of that, and this probably pertains a little bit more to a lot of the audience on this line, is that I think a lot of the tech-based community was a little bit overlooked in some instances. No indictment, obviously, to the programs and the support that was going to Main Street and to service businesses and to restaurants and retailers, but not as much attention, I think, was being diverted to these tech-based initiatives or solutions and startups that have different nuanced needs. They raise capital differently. They have different levels of runway. They have, different levels of capital assets. So we are going to be issuing next week a survey to all of the tech-based community across the state of Michigan in order to really more keenly understand their needs, so that service providers like Interbeing and others on this line can more definitively tailor, whether it's educational services, coaching and mentoring services, programs, whatever it is going forward to meet those needs. So pretty excited about that. Via my work, that is, Jean knows well, Rachel knows well, and others hopefully on this line that may have participated or been engaged with MedHealth.
Yeah, we had Stacy Frankovich on here a couple of weeks ago, so she did a nice job for us.
Yeah, Stacy's awesome. So glad to have her. One of the tangential kind of relationships that has evolved because of MedHealth is with an organization called the National Healthcare Coalition for COVID-19. C19HCC is the kind of acronym, C19HCC. And whatever I rattle off from this point, you guys don't have to try to, jot down fast, because I'll share this with Jean, and Jean, you can post as you do resources to your website so people can have those readily available. But some of these resources come from the National Coalition, which is probably over 100 organizations that have come together to really collaboratively fight COVID-19, from Mayo Clinic to Medtronic to HCA, HL7, SAP, Amazon, Google, Pfizer. List just goes on and on. Universities, the like. So one is that came across my plate is a $500 million grant opportunity for diagnostic testing of SARS-CoV-2. And this is through the National Institute of Biomedical Engineering and Bioengineering, or NIBIB. It is really to raise and increase the capacity for testing, which has come up on this line, is the importance of it. But it's to accelerate development, validation, commercialization, innovative point of care, you name it. So it's just a great resource, and it's for nonprofit, academics, and for-profit entities, small and large, who are eligible to receive support from this opportunity. So I'll share that with you.
That's great.
Also, Amazon just released a COVID-19 search algorithm, artificial intelligence, machine learning driven. It's called COVID-19 for COVID Open Research Dataset. That's what the CORD, C-O-R-D, stands for. And it allows for natural language interpretation of questions that can be asked, I guess kind of Siri directed towards, or Alexa directed towards COVID-19, but, like, what is the R naught of, COVID-19, the mean R naught? Or you could ask, what is the salivary viral load of, COVID-19, or whatever it is. And it's powered by research papers, over 47,000 research papers from across the world, peer-reviewed publications. So it's a pretty robust data set that, people can really lean on and look to for information. There's also, I learned about a free registry for logging and tracking ventilators. So for healthcare providers who want to, make their ventilators available for tracking in the event, and God forbid that we see another spike in COVID at any given time in the future. But if in fact there's a need or willingness to, have flexible tracking of this technology for accurate and inexpensive way, it's called Locator X. And it's all free, no cost for the service, and primarily with a simple scan, you can log and track, the ventilators. From a telehealth perspective, there's a $200 million FCC telehealth program for eligible healthcare provider sites to treat patients in rural or non-rural U.S. territories. So applications just opened April 13th of 2020. And funding decisions are being made on a rolling basis. So that's a huge opportunity for those who are in the telehealth space.
And that's going to become a bigger and bigger thing as we're going forward here. There's a lot of focus there. People talked about it before, but now it's like, nope, we're doing telehealth.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in those rural areas where they're under-resourced and, don't have the same levels of access as the dense, more urban populations in cities. So, but the NPI, non-pharmaceutical interventions, there's an interactive dashboard that is amazing, that sits and is housed at CH19, C19HCC, I'm sorry, C19HCC. But it's for a lot of the things that we were talking about today, social distancing, business closures, mass gathering restrictions, school closure, personal actions of face masks, isolations when sick, and then environmental actions. It's a huge amount of data that's on a dashboard that's being analyzed and then being reflected. But it's really to give real-time situational awareness for individuals at a national level, to enable us to learn from each other and what other locations and geographies are doing. And it's based on actual data, not models, to the point earlier. So that's a good point.
Like that. That's awesome.
Last but not least, there is for all of us who have, workplace environments, who are considering how to reopen our workplace environments. I think some of us may have seen the Michigan workplace improvement to safety and health grant program, or My Wish, and they're doing $5,000 match grants for purchase safety and health related equipment upon re-entering facilities. So that's another
Interesting.
opportunity that folks can take care of.
That's for if people need
supplies.
to get masks and stuff because they're going to be in proximity or whatever.
Exactly. Yep.
Very cool.
Goal of the program is to create a safe and healthier work environment for when we start re-entering.
That's an amazing amount of information you just got us there, Paul.
It took me too long. I went over.
You did great. I mean, if all y'all on the call don't know Paul Reiser, isn't one of those people you got to get to know. Paul's one of the ones who got word out when we first said we were going to do this, and I think a couple minutes before we went live here, he's texting me and saying, this person over here needs to get in touch with these people over here. That's Paul Reiser. That's what he does. He connects people, and so we thank you for doing that, Paul. All you're doing at Tech Town with Med Health and keeping all these things up in front of people. It's just sometimes it's a full-time job just connecting people.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for what you're doing. Keep doing it. And thanks for having me on. And thanks to everyone else. Have a great sunny weekend, everyone.
It's supposed to be absolutely beautiful. Paul, if you're willing to have your info shared, or there's anything you want folks to know, please drop your a little text in the webinar chat, and that will go directly into the contact list as well, so folks can make contact with you. Really appreciate that. Great. Well, thank you to all of our guests. We appreciate that. I want to give you a quick update before we do the open forum and Q&A. I want to give you a quick update on the FDA's emergency use authorizations. It's been a relatively quiet week in EUA land, but there's a few things to note, and I'm going to bring a screen back up here in just a minute. We'll come to this in just a second. So the first thing I want to point out is that we have been interacting on a number of EUAs. I wish I could share the details with you right now, but those are still in process. Just a few general observations, though. We've been involved in ventilator and mask and in decontamination EUAs that are all active with FDA. And one of the things that you should know if you're thinking about pursuing an emergency use authorization is FDA has largely gone to a lot of interactive review templates for this that they seem to have created in the last handful of weeks. Don't be surprised if you go to FDA with all the information you think they need based on what they've said in the EUAs, that they're going to come back and ask for it once or twice again. They seem to be triaging. They seem to be saying we've got too much to deal with. You're going to have to say the same thing a few times to get through, but that's okay because they're really responsive once they start coming back and interacting with you. We just have to say we think they're doing a really, really good job of that review process. Definitely it's a fall back to basics kind of mentality. So this isn't the time to be wildly innovative. This isn't the time to look for amazing new ways to prove safety and efficacy. This is very much a back to basics. As we alluded to earlier when we were talking with Anthony and Rosemary, the FDA is actually now saying that we don't know what the infection level is for SARS-CoV-2. Like, how much of it do you have to have in your body before you're likely to become susceptible to it? They don't know that. How much has to be on a mask before that mask is contaminated? We actually don't know that. And so they tend to be falling back to other kinds of proof to prove that you're for example, killing things. And so just be ready to not get terribly innovative, but to do the things that they're asking for and to do them quickly to get back to them. As always, reduce your claims, increase your warnings, limit what you're making a claim for in the product that you're marketing. Those are some general observations from the EUA trenches. Real quick note on test kit manufacturers and commercial laboratories. Last week we had 45 that had gone through the EUA process. This week there are 53. High complexity tests, and this is setting the stage for where we go in the future. I think that's going to be a focus of next week's conversation, is going to be a lot of the diagnostics. And the high complexity tests, we had 18 last week, now 23 are authorized through the emergency use authorization process. I want to let you know that there are no new decontamination systems on the market this week. The last one was the 20th of April. And we hear about a lot in process, but there are no new decontamination systems on the market authorized this week. And the last thing I want to update you on here is the contents of Appendix B. If you recall, Appendix B is the ventilator appendix that says what ventilators are authorized under the EUA. We talked about this one last week, but it hadn't received its emergency use authorization. This one from NASA, Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And if you look at this box in front of you, it certainly looks like something that NASA would come up with. It's, to some of us, a beautiful box. And if I go over to this other tab, you will see that JPL on the 30th got their emergency use authorization. In addition, Shenzhen Yamind Medical Tech has a non-continuous ventilator. Venti Now Resuscitator is an emergency resuscitator, received authorization on April 30th. Those are the new ventilators. You'll see our friends from Prisma Health and Make Medical down here on the connectors, as well now as Northwell Health with a printed BiPAP adapter, and our friends at Formlabs. Everyone knows Formlabs and their 3D printing services, and they have a printed BiPAP adapter that has gotten the nod from FDA under the EUA process. So that's the updates on the ventilator Appendix B. What we're going to do next is we're going to go over to Q&A before we do an open forum. And so if you do have a question, if your question might be for one of our guests today, your question might be about some of the EUAs that we've covered in previous shows. Maybe you're trying to market something. Maybe you're trying to connect with somebody and you don't know who to connect with. I would welcome you to raise your hand and we'll make you live, and you can tell us if you're a manufacturer or a material supplier or a convener and you want to tell us about your needs or your efforts. If you've told us about yourself before, that's great. You're on the contact list. You're being circulated every week. But if you have a new update or a new tidbit you'd like to share with us, we would welcome you to come on in just a minute. Right now, though, we're going to take any questions that we may have. And going over to Aaron, do we see any questions in the Q&A box yet?
Yep, there's one question in the Q&A. Let's see. Has anyone heard any rumors of the FDA closing the window on ventilator EUA submissions?
Oh, that's an interesting question. We certainly have not heard anything about FDA closing the EUA window. However, it's pretty clear that FDA said the EUAs are there for as long as the public health crisis is there. And part of the discussion we were having today is, where are we with that? And I think the consensus right now is some things have gotten a little bit better, but we still don't really know the full extent of where we are. So I think we're in this period where everyone's evaluating exactly where are we and exactly what's going on. So what we can say factually about the emergency use authorizations is that when FDA determines that there's no longer a public health crisis, those EUAs will cease to be effective. But we don't know exactly when that's going to happen. I don't know if any of the other of our team have anything to add to that question, or if anyone on the call has heard anything that you'd like to add to that question. If not, any other questions, feel free to raise your hand. And we will move right on to open forum as well. If you have a need or a new effort that you're working on that you would like to share, we would love to hear from you. So feel free to raise your virtual hand and we would love to talk with you. We will give folks just a moment on that. I'm seeing a couple hands come up now. Stephen Braddock, you are live with us if you unmute.
Good afternoon. I've got a question with respect to wipes and FDA and or EPA requirements. We're looking at either developing our own wipes and or bringing in at least raw materials from other countries in Central and South America, as well as Asia as options. But I'm not familiar with the requirements for FDA and or EPA requirements for wipes. Is there anything you can do to give some direction or thought on that?
Stephen, what a great question. We actually, in these 6 weeks, we actually have not gotten that question, which is kind of amazing. Of course, we're all familiar with, they're not wipes. We're all familiar with back in January, the FDA gave Purell a hard time because of the claims that they were making along with their hand sanitizing solution. So we knew that they were paying attention. I'm gonna phone a friend here and see if any of our folks at Into Being have heard anything about wipes. We certainly haven't seen them as part of the EUA process that we've noticed, but anyone on our team have an idea about that? If not, Stephen, you better believe we're gonna take a look at that and get you an answer this week. But let me go over to the team and see if they know anything about wipes.
The only thing that I have seen is the EPA has a list of disinfectants with sort of that are known to be effective when disinfecting surfaces, and it includes some data that they've collected on like contact time and things like that. I don't know how that translates to wipes, but I think that's where I would start looking, and then I'm guessing is that it's going to be the EPA that's going to oversee a lot of the sort of disinfecting aspects of things.
That's great. Appreciate that input, Aaron. Anything else from the rest of the team there? Stephen, we've got your contact information. Is that all right if we reach back out to you with any more information we dig up on that?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Great question. Love it.
Paul had a question in the chat.
Oh, gotcha. You know what we're going to do? Look, I want to bring I think we will bring, let's bring Dr. Daniels back on in just a minute, as well as Paul Reiser, and we'll have Paul ask his question in just a second. I think it's an interesting question, so if you guys can stick with us just a minute, we'll do that. I want to pop over for just a second to Trip Adams, who is live with us. If you unmute, Trip.
Oh, hey, chiming in here from WVAC. I'm actually looking at the more future of UVC general acceptance and overall integration in more of the private workforce rather than the healthcare systems. And as I'm looking into that, I really find some limited ground that has been explored or tread so far in the non-medical UVC sterilization applications. Is there anybody that's really breaking ground on that side, or that can really speak to the marketplace that I feel is absolutely going to explode in response to COVID? Who really is the general best source of information as we look at taking a medical appliance and retooling it or recertifying it for general public availability and use?
And this is basically the question of, we're going to be so interested in wearing masks and killing things on surfaces and people in the future, and who's doing the thinking about that. Is that roughly correct?
Yeah, I think that, and UVC is a specific focus. We as a organization initially identified the massive strain that was on supply chain across the board for medical PPE as a direct deliverable. But looking to the future, I think that sterilization system is going to be just as, if not 10 times more important. So looking at that for all applications, not just PPE, but phones, keys, things that transfer hands just in office settings across the board.
Yeah, it's a valid question. I mean, the need is going to be there, and people are going to be asking about it. And then the question becomes, who's thinking about that from an industrial perspective? And also, you have to ask with respect to how FDA, we just mentioned, treated Purell. January of this year. A little timing might not have been so great, but they basically said, you're making all sorts of claims that are actually medical claims, and they gave Purell a really hard time about it. So then the other question is, how much does FDA get involved if what you're saying you're doing is killing bugs and reducing transmission of disease? But it's a valid question, and if any of our folks on the line have any thoughts about that, we would welcome that. I'm gonna leave your line open there for just a minute in case that discussion comes back up and anyone has a thought, and we could engage in dialogue. So thank you for that question.
I think, Trip, to answer some of that, I think we're going to see a lot of, kind of like we've been seeing from the Attorney General, we're going to see a lot of situations where there's going to be companies with sort of overreaching claims that that they haven't substantiated, and then there's going to be kind of a spike in that, and then a kind of a crackdown as we find the new kind of what the new normal is. And I could see things coming out around UV sterilization systems and things like that, and then the question always comes back is like, well, how vetted is this, and stuff like that, because the wavelength is very important for those systems on how effective they are against things like these viruses.
Great. Yeah. I'm going to take one more question here from Shannon O'Hara. You're live with us. And then I'm going to go back to Paul Reiser and Rodney Daniels, because I think there's an interesting conversation to be had there before we close out. So real quick question from you, Shannon. Appreciate you having you on.
Hi, thank you for having me. Excuse me. I am a co-founder of a group called Skilled Laborers Brigade, and we are a very large group of garment makers. I organized over 500 garment makers in
Wow.
and garment making factories to make PPEs, and we've been putting out a very impressive number. And as we pursue more grants and some philanthropy, we're starting to see the real switch go mostly into the need for gowns. I think mostly because it's groups like my group that can most effectively make gowns, because we have the factory equipment for large scale cutting, and the industrial equipment for finishing seams, and et cetera, et cetera. So my question is, I've been looking for more of the class 3-4 approved fabrics, and it's difficult to find. We have found a few mills, and I just was putting it out there. If anybody has access to any of these fabrics, I would love to be put in touch. I think we're going to be probably buying a lot. I just got contacted by the state of New York for possibly making a large amount. And so, yeah, that's my question for you guys. And it's been a wild ride in this realm.
I bet. No, I think that's really great that you're doing that, because in the textile side of things, I think one of the things that we saw, because I think I've mentioned on previous calls, we have reached out to some of our team who had the ability to do some mask things, and they've done a great job of that. And then we started to see the wave of textile needs that were out there, and it's like, yeah, there had to be a bigger aggregation, especially for some of those gowns and things. So it's neat that you're doing that. I guess, Shannon, what I would say is we'll leave your line open also for a second here in case anyone has anything they want to say live in response to that. But I would also encourage you, please put your name and contact information and a good description of what you just said into the chat box, because that will get put into the contact list that gets sent out every week. So that'll get sent out every week to folks, and that question will keep getting asked. So we would really appreciate that. And if we have any links that we can make up, we would certainly be happy to do that.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Shannon. Really appreciate that. Great. I just saw a note here from Steve Goldner, who we had on last week. He said, we just had an excellent phase 2 clinical trial implementation become a virtual clinical trial for D9, THC, and osteoarthritis. If anyone wants help continuing to run their clinical trial during COVID, please reach out for regulatory help. Thanks, Stephen. I want to bring back on our friends Rodney and Paul. If you guys want to bring your video and your audio back on as we're getting ready to close out. There's Rodney. Welcome back.
Hi.
There's Paul. Paul, you had a great question, and I wanted you to ask this one live of Rodney, because I think this is a fascinating question. This had to do with the symptoms, which we didn't touch on earlier.
And if you don't mind, I'd like to dovetail this into a slight two-part question. So the first part.
Okay, that's up to Rodney. He's going to have to say it.
Yeah, and I think Rodney can address them both. So
I'll take the challenge.
Awesome. The first is relative to I am forever and unavoidably paranoid of any cough, sneeze, or anything that I have. The first thing comes to mind is it COVID? And so I'm also seeing this growing list of CDC kind of approved or confirmed symptoms that is expanded to chills and headaches. And so I just wanted to kind of get your take on how worried we should be. How do we track it? You know, kind of what your thoughts and feedback on that. And then the other is this repurposed industrial respirator that could free ventilators for COVID-19 patients that came out of Michigan, which is a hood and a helmet. And it's supposed to have 20 times the greater air exchange and obviously much less expensive. So if you could speak to just those two, just giving some thoughts, that'd be awesome. I'm going to go on mute too, because I got two little ones here who just fired up.
I've got my kids in the house too. They just happen to be outside. So to answer so to answer your first question, it might not be a comfortable answer. And the reason I say that is because as we get more data, as we get more people who've tested positive, as we get more people presenting, we found that there's more than just respiratory failure, hypoxia, low oxygen levels, and, dyspnea, in other words, difficulty breathing that presents. You've heard of the asymptomatic people out there that are positive. There actually seems to be some people that, I mentioned this before briefly, but that have even GI symptoms. And, I don't want to turn everybody out there into being paranoid about any little thing you're going to get, because there are still common things are still also common other than COVID that you can get. Maybe eat something, bad salad or something, you're going to have some GI symptoms, whatever. But GI symptoms are there. So even for screening, those of us who have been on the, in the units, if we have any symptoms like diarrhea with a headache and not even necessarily fever, but if we have that with, other symptoms, maybe a change in smell or maybe some coughing, then they're testing us to be sure that we're not positive. Which gets to the issue that unfortunately a lot of people are going to have different symptoms. The primary symptom still is going to be coughing, respiratory symptoms, not as much necessarily a ton of upper airway congestion, although some people are congested with it, but a lot of just difficulty, more breathing more quickly. And again, I gave the analogy of being on Everest, because a lot of people, their respiratory rate goes up higher, but they don't realize they're quite in the trouble that they are until, oh my gosh, they go, I'm breathing harder now. They go to the hospital and their sats are like 88. And if you've ever tried to push your own saturations down, we should do it in medical school for fun, even though it doesn't sound like a fun thing to do, but we'd see like, can I hold my breath? How far can my sats go down? And it is extremely hard to get your sat below like 92 even. You feel like you're almost suffocating. So to be able to get to the point where that feels uncomfortable, but it's not necessarily that I feel horrible and your sats are 90 and 88, it really gets to the issue. So that's the primary thing. It still is, but there are a lot of other symptoms. So the long story short is there are a lot of symptoms out there, and the secondary response to that is that's why we need a lot more testing, because we need to know who's walking around, who has it. That's how we're also going to open up things, because if you have mild symptoms but you had it, oh wow, I had it, so maybe I need to stay away from doing some of those things for a while. So that's why people are really talking about extensive testing. It's not just to highlight that we haven't had as much testing as we need, but it's also to highlight that's really important, because there are a lot of other nondescript symptoms that are coming out as the CD's adding on that we're seeing are significant enough that it's across patients who have COVID. So we need to add them on as potential symptoms. And that's the problem. Again, it's a very heterogeneous disease. Like sepsis and others, where different people react differently, their bodies respond differently, and we still don't really understand all of the mechanisms of this disease when it comes to attacking us. So that's a little bit of a long answer for that, but hopefully that was okay and that makes sense.
That was great.
As far as the technology, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying thanks. That was perfect.
Okay, no problem. It may not help your worry, but hopefully it helps a little bit. Just hopefully we can get more extensive testing out there.
Yeah,
But
great.
generally, if you have mild things, you feel good, that's generally a good sign. So hopefully you'll be able to feel yourself really getting that fatigue and getting sick, and at least having some fatigue with it, whatever it is. And that will may give you an idea, maybe there's more there. So
That's great.
as far as the hood goes, I'm not directly involved with that project, but the hood is really meant to be something to go over the head. It's not really meant to itself ventilate the patient. It's meant to be a negative pressure environment that pulls basically any respiratory secretions, any aerosolized particles through that system and through a filter, so that it doesn't go out into the room, into caregivers when they're coming in there. So for instance, you put someone on high flow, goes in their nose, BiPAP mask, those kind of things, then the hood goes over them with that respiratory support mechanism to make sure that those particles don't escape. Because when you have someone BiPAP, CPAP, there's a valve there. It has to have a certain valve. There's a certain amount of leak that you kind of need to have those systems work properly, as many of the people on the call probably understand. But that causes aerosolized particles. So that's where this really hood enables us to help ventilate people non-invasively without having a tube down their throat, but in a way that's safer for people. So that's really the major benefit of it, is to provide a microenvironment basically for their head and shoulders that protects everyone around them, and could even turn a non-negative pressure room into a effective negative pressure area, because the patient's under negative pressure, so to speak. So that's kind of how the hood is working, and it was modeled after an industrial hood of a similar for a similar purpose. So that's generally how it.
That's the system Dr. Kevin Ward's working on.
Yes. MCIRC, Dr. Kevin Ward, and some others over at MCIRC have been working to modify this industrial hood to have enough space to be able to provide these other supports, but also protect others. So.
Yeah, I saw the picture of him wearing the system, and I think I recognized the hood from there's actually a local Michigan company that produces that for the industrial space and stuff.
Yeah, and I'd encourage anyone that wants to learn more, certainly you can contact MCIRC, Kevin, ask them more about it, reach out to them. Certainly, MCIRC's always happy to talk to people.
Yeah, and Ken Spencer's been a frequent attender on our conference and has been keeping us up
Ken's
to date on
here
that too, which is great. Well, it's wonderful. There's one more quick question that's come in. I don't know if anyone on the call has a thought about it. It's sort of a forward-thinking question. This is from Cindy, thinking a step ahead into our future and wondering if anyone is aware of any studies regarding overuse of antibacterials, sanitizers, etc. Effects could be illness from overexposure, as well as harming our natural immune systems by killing essential germs and bacteria that we need to be exposed to on a regular basis. I don't know if we're going to get a solid answer to that on this call, but I think it's an interesting question that certainly could come into a future discussion that we have, and maybe it'll come up again. I just want to remind everybody, just to get it out there again, Shannon O'Hara is looking for skilled laborers brigade. She's looking for materials for the fabrics for gowns. She says it's often called blockade. So please, if you're a manufacturer of materials, please get with Shannon after the call. Unless there's any other pressing questions, we're just a few minutes past our normal time to end. So I want to thank you all for being here today on the 7th installment of COVID Connect. Appreciate all your time and all of our panelists for being on today. And we're looking forward to being with you again next week. We're going to turn a lot of attention towards diagnostics next week and start to think about that with you as we move forward. Thanks again for being here. I hope you have a wonderful and a beautiful weekend. It's supposed to be lovely. Get out there and enjoy the day. Talk soon.
Thanks a lot, Gene.